Hello, I've just read chapter 4 of The Last of the Jedi, Underworld. So, Ferris and Trevor, they get down to the storage unit room, the storage unit hallway stuff from lower levels, the storage unit level, let's just call it that. And Ferris is expecting to have to fight his way through, etc. And the door opens, and he has his lightsaber ready, and there's no one there. In fact, it's dusty. And he's cautious to begin with. But he gradually starts making his way through. And he listens for sounds, and he even uses the Force to sense if there's any living being near. And yeah, his Force sense is a bit rusty, but he still received nothing, and you thought, surely, if this was a prison, he would pick up the echoes of the living force, no matter how faint, especially from a Jedi. And Trevor says, you look worried, and Ferris says that he doesn't feel anything, and Trevor goes, is that all? And Ferris says that's everything for a Jedi. And they move forward, and we learn that Ferris isn't as familiar with this level. And although Jedi are taken on an extensive tour around the temple to memorise it, Ferris visits the storage areas infrequently. And luckily it's just a standard layout with parallel hallways, and storage rooms are varying size, and they look into each one and they're always empty, except for pretty much just some worthless items. And Trevor says, I guess the Empire found the Trevor. The Trevor! I guess the Empire found the treasure, Trevor said. But maybe they overlooked something. Anything down here? What Trevor? Treasure? Ferris asked. The treasure the Jedi had, Trevor said. You know the Order was rich. All those payments from worlds they protected. Ferris was furious. That was a lie told by the Emperor. The Jedi never took payment for their services. Palpatine was trying to turn the galaxy against the Jedi to justify his crimes. Now you're repeating the lies. Hey Ferris, power down. How was I supposed to know it was a lie? Everyone said it. Everyone says the Emperor is on your side too. Excellent point. And Ferris thinks that in many ways that is the worst part of Order 66. It destroyed pretty much what the Jedi stood for. It made them look like they were very greedy and hungry for power, rather than being selfless and etc. And Trevor looks at his expression and said that he's sorry, and he eats the word treasure, and he starts to go a little bit so and he says, you forget I'm a thief, and Ferris says, not anymore. And Ferris just doesn't quite understand. This is a logical place for a prison, and the word on the street is that the Jedi are down deep in the temple storerooms. And Trevor asks if there's anywhere else they could be keeping them, and Ferris says anything is possible. But that's when he sees a glint of a reflection. There we go. Wasn't sure if my microphone was out, just because the meter is very small when I talk. Anyway, Ferris then catches a reflection, and he walks into the storage room, and it takes him by surprise what he sees. Lightsabers. And Trevor doesn't say anything in what's described as a rare display of tact, and he says nothing. And Ferris just takes the moment to absorb what's everything going on, and he picks up some of the lightsabers and puts them back down, and there's jumbles and piles of them, and some are laid out neatly, as it says in the book, no doubt for identification, and he just whispers to himself, how many? And he leans over to pick one up and another one, and the next part of the book says, here was the proof. The Empire must have collected the lightsabers when they could, but for what purpose, he wasn't sure. To identify Jedi, perhaps? But who would be able to recognise the hilts but another Jedi? Or perhaps they meant to study the lightsabers in order to be able to use them as weapons one day. After all, everyone had told him that Emperor Palpatine was a Sith, Darth Vader was his apprentice. Did they want to build a Sith army? But what did it matter? There was a pounding inside him, metal against rock, something fierce and elemental. Grief was pounding him. And there is a very powerful line here, and I'll have to try and figure out the deeper meaning to later. But this is how it worked, he realised. Each time you think you have comprehension of your sorrow, you get blindsided again. You slide back into your rage and your disbelief. And he keeps looking at them, and he knows that to the Empire, they were just another Jedi that were eliminated and had to be taken out. It was just systematic, but first it was personal. Each lightsaber has a life, a nobility, a person with hopes and dreams and passions and wills behind it, and that's when he sees True Veld's lightsaber. And I've been wrong if you remember in the Desperate Mission when I was told that he repaired True Veld's lightsaber. Again, having gone through Jedi Quest, I keep saying this in every chapter, but I assume that he repaired True Veld's lightsaber after it was faulty, but apparently Ferris repaired it without realising he was making it faulty. So that was a bit of a twist that I wasn't expecting. And he sees True Veld's lightsaber there, and little had he known at the time that this small favour he was doing would be the end of his career as a Jedi. And he didn't know quite what to do with the lightsaber. He didn't want to leave it, but he gazes around and knows True Veld has wanted it left there. And Ferris again starts to get overwhelmed with emotion with how each lightsaber had someone behind it, and then he goes, the fact that he was gone, here it was again, that feelings of something being too real and yet impossible at the same time. And Trevor tries to get Ferris's attention, saying that he hears something, and Ferris was just too overwhelmed with emotion with sorrow to have heard the noise. And he goes, "Oh, silent alarm!" And he thought, "Oh, I should have known," because he fought the Empire on Belasa, and he knew their tricks. And it finally clicked for him that, this isn't a Jedi prison, it's a trap. And then literally the last line is, "It's a trap." And he realises that the words on the street are to lure Jedi into the temple, to capture all Jedi and kill them. And that's where we end off the chapter. Again, there's not really a whole lot in this chapter that I can really say that I haven't really said already, but we do get to see quite a bit of how much Trevor has respect for the Jedi, and how much he cares about the truth. And I think probably the most interesting part about Ferris as a character is that despite him becoming a Jedi again, and him being a former Jedi, he has had that chance to live a normal life for quite a number of years to this point. And so it's interesting to see how he emotionally reacts to many of these things. And I think it's very interesting. It's something you wouldn't really expect to see, usually. And you wouldn't really see this not with quote-unquote normal Jedi. who would try to be very respectful and accepting of it, whereas Ferrus is just angry. He's just angry that that the Empire's, that Palpatine manipulated the galaxy, that the Jedi are framed for something that they didn't do, and he just wants to put things right. He's just fed up and frustrated, and then he has all these, and being in the temple is just giving him all these reminders of his past, and it just keeps interrupting his mission, which was to try and find the Jedi. And I think it is such an interesting thing to look at with Ferrus, because, again, he's had the chance to break away from the shackles of being a normal Jedi. And it's a very interesting perspective to see it this way, rather than the more typical formal, okay, they're gone now. But that's the way of life. For Ferrus, it really is, they're gone now. This is not acceptable. And so, it's a very interesting dynamic that you wouldn't really get with a more traditional Jedi character. And even with how even with how he reacts when Trevor says there's the Jedi, about when Trevor starts talking about the Jedi's alleged treasure, and how, normal Jedi, they would be, no, that wasn't true, and they would try to explain it in a fairly pleasant way, and you have Ferrus there, who's just getting angry and angrier, and he's just so frustrated. And you can tell that he's just had enough of all of this pain and suffering. It just continues on and on and on, and you really just feel for Ferrus. You really just want to give him a big hug and tell him everything's okay. But, yeah. Again, this was a very short chapter. This is the shortest of all the chapters so far. It only went for about 5 pages, 5-6 pages. And so, but even so, it was a good chapter. And I think, again, this really just does show you how emotionally attached Ferrus is to the Jedi, even though he's no longer one. But yeah, that's my review for Chapter 4 of The Last of the Jedi, Underworld. Thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello everyone. I've just read Chapter 5 of The Last of the Jedi, Dark Warning, Underworld. So, last chapter, I wanted to quickly cover a little bit of that about last chapter, because I don't think I mentioned it in that review, but I did predict that, the fact that, it wasn't a prison, it was a trap. I pretty much predicted it while I was reading that chapter. But anyway, on to Chapter 5 now. I think I'm almost halfway through the book. Looking at just how many pages there are left. It looks to be about half. Nearly. Anyway, on to Chapter 5. So, Ferrus knows that the Jedi Temple wasn't just built for beauty, it was also built with an eye for utility, and so he goes to the back of the storage unit, and he sees what he suspects, and he sees what he hoped to see, which was an entrance to a service tunnel, and so he uses his lightsaber to cut it open because the control panel for the door is broken and it's sealed by the door. He knows the stormtroopers will eventually find them, so they rush through, and that's when they come up to another door, and this control panel works. They run through, and the door closes behind them, so and the stormtroopers won't know they're there. And Ferris looks at the shelf. They're in another storage unit room, and Ferris looks at the shelves, the empty shelves, and he sees markings on there, and he goes, "They marked them." Trevor goes, "Oh," they left marks, and Trevor goes, "What left marks?" And Ferris goes, "The bins, the food storage bins. This was a food storage room." And then Ferris starts to think, and he starts saying, as he moves over to a control panel, he starts explaining that the cooks used to, if they needed ingredients, would send out a kind of, would put the ingredients they needed on a screen in the kitchen, and droids would come down, collect the food, put them into little chutes of into little lifts that were powered by compressed air, and then they'd be held in stasis in mid-air with an area that had no gravity. And Ferris says that they can use that to escape. And Trevor goes, "I'm not a can of beans." But anyway, Ferris gets Trevor in there, and he says to Trevor if he can't make it, to steal a ship and go back to the asteroid. Anyway, so Trevor gets in there. Ferris attempts to get into another chute, but he just can't quite fit in there, and he starts to remember a memory with Siri where they were hiking and he fell, and Siri makes sure he's okay, and says, "Why didn't you use the Force to stop yourself from falling?" And we're told that at that time Ferris was only 14 and he wasn't able to call on the Force as easily, but he didn't want to admit it, and he says that there wasn't enough time, and Siri says there's always enough time for a Jedi. And she goes on to say that your body's not just bone and muscle, it's made of fluids and air, etc. And as Ferris is trying to sit up, he's getting all tangled up because he's growing fast, and he's often finds his limbs getting tangled up, and that's how he fell. And Siri tells him that, and the floor isn't as hard as it looks. Ferris says, "So you say." Siri laughs as she helps him up, and what does she say? Come back a little bit too far. She says, "You make everything harder than it has to be, Ferris, even dirt." But then Ferris uses the Force to assist himself into getting into space, and he shoots up, and he comes out, and you have Trevor there saying, "Hey, that was a fun ride," because I'll just read you the interaction for after Ferris explains his plan, if I can find it. Here we go. "You mean you're going to blast me up on thin air?" Trevor didn't seem sure of that. "You'll have the ride of your life. Can I remind you, I'm not a can of beans. Within luck, it still works. Hey, what happens if the zero gravity part doesn't work? Look for a handhold on your way down, Trevor. It's the only way to escape the stormtroopers. They'll never figure it out. It just keeps getting better and better." But anyway, Ferris gets up there, and Trevor says, "You were right, the ride was fun." And that's when Ferris feels the Force surge, and just before we get that, we get a little bit of a description of the kitchen, and how it's a bit more intact, more or less. But it is still blackened, and there is still rubble scattered about the place, but there is one stove working, and a table cleared for dining, and that's when the Force surges. And that's when 20 stormtroopers and an officer walk in. And I'll just read out the line, if I can get to it. The Force surged, a warning, only half a second before he heard the door open. He really had to work on his Force connection, What was the use of a warning if suddenly 20 stormtroopers appeared in your face? So that made me laugh. Oh, and then Trevor goes, whoa, and dives for cover, while Ferris starts deflecting the bolts. And Ferris tells Trevor to go near one of the stoves, as there is a little bit of, as there's a tunnel there, or a hallway, a passageway, what was it? Yeah, and he just says an exit, and so Trevor starts going there, and he's running in a crazy pattern as it's described, which makes him really hard to hit. And Ferris starts thinking that the stormtroopers and the officer would follow them into the corridor, and he wouldn't be able to lose them there. But the half-demolished library was close. There could be more cover there. He could get to the second level of the library and get out through the back door, and from there he doesn't quite know where to go, and then he thinks, oh, the answer comes to him, and he goes, Yoda's private quarters, Malorum's office. And Malorum was away, it would be empty and quiet, and they could access files from there, maybe find a way to get out. I'm having to skim through this bit, because it is just, it's a very long plan. And anyway, Malorum was away, it would be empty and quiet, and so they would be able to access files, maybe find a way to get out, and maybe even find out what Malorum was up to, and the stormtroopers would never think someone would be stupid enough to hide in the main Inquisitor's private office, and the only problem is that they'd have to go through a bunch of main hallways to get there, and they'd be spotted. So Ferris clears his mind. He recalls walking into the Room of 1,000 Fountains earlier, and recalls seeing a canopy that used to imitate the sky, and how there were catwalks up there for the lights, to service the lights, and how it connected to a power conduct tunnel that ran in the walls, and they were smaller than the service tunnels, but built so that a service person could squeeze in to work on the circuits at any point. Trevor is now waiting for him in the corridor. I told you it was a long plan. But Trevor's now waiting for him in the corridor, and Ferris is a few seconds ahead of the stormtroopers, and they start going down the corridor. They turn a corner, just as the stormtroopers are firing on them. Just as the stormtroopers start to fire on them, and Ferris has no doubt that the officer's calling for backup. And he knows the hallways would soon be flooded with stormtroopers. And Ferris tells him to go that way, and as the stormtroopers are firing, it's sending chunks of stone falling on their heads. But more blaster bolts now fly down the hallway, and I'll just read this line. They were shooting just to shoot now, even though Ferris and Trevor were out of range. It was an Imperial tactic he remembers from his time in the Belarsan Resistance. Shoot to intimidate, as well as kill. Why not? The Imperials didn't lack any ammunition, and they didn't care about physical destruction of property. And now the door to the main hallway is jammed, so Ferris leaps at it using both of his feet to open it, and it opens up. Ferris closes it with a lift of his hand and using the force, and then it starts to get instantly torn up by the blaster bolts. So Ferris and Trevor start darting down a short flight of stairs. They go into the library, and Ferris has to keep telling himself to not grieve. Now is not the time. Now is the time to plan. And as he goes through, they kick through the rubbles of the broken statues that have been the likenesses of many Jedi Masters. And the staircase is gone, so they climb up a stack of rubble, and they reach a balcony, and ran down to the rear door, and Ferris slides it open a centimetre and sees there's two officers in there, and there are two stormtroopers, and there were a couple of stormtroopers coming their way. Several of them, and he starts to hear stormtroopers downstairs, and he knows that they have to pull this off at just the right moment. And so once the stormtroopers pass and the officers continue going on, that's when Ferris and Trevor start to run through. Then they go over to it really starts to pick up this chapter. And then they start to run through into the Room of a Thousand Fountains. Ferris uses his liquid cable to pull himself and Trevor up. Trevor says, "I'm starting to get used to this." And he's not having any trouble keeping up now, Trevor. And so now they start to go through the tunnel thingy, mobobs, whatever it was, on that you get through the catwalks, and they start crawling through them. And it says crawling, but then it says they bend over. Ferris bends over later. So yeah, and Ferris warns Trevor that this one's in the wall, he says in a whisper, so tread lightly. And Ferris starts to picture where Yoda's quarters is, and when he assumes they're about when he assumes that they were near the door, he holds up a hand to Trevor, and there's a great door in front of him, and he opens it a little, and you could see that they're opposite of it, and he sees the hallway are empty, and he's about to open the grate and ready to ease it off, and that's when he hears footsteps, and it's Malorum, who again isn't meant to be back until tomorrow, and he's striding in his inquisitive lobes, as it says, and there's an assistant hurrying by his side. Now, funnily enough, Hydra doesn't appear in the early books, according to in this series, according to Wikipedia. But she is described as Malorum's assistant, and she for some reason doesn't appear in any of the books in the early in the books that Malorum appears in, despite being Malorum's assistant. So I'm just going to assume that this is Hydra, even though it's not named. But again, the character's not named either, so I'm just going to say and assume that this is Hydra, because again, she's described as his personal assistant. It is said that Malorum's striding with an assistant beside him. You're like, come on. And anyway, the two... I'm just going to refer to the assistant as Hydra. It's not Hydra. It's not described as Hydra, but come on, it's... When you leave an assistant unnamed with no gender, it's hot, and you've established later that there is an assistant from Malorum called Hydra. You go on, I'm just going to call them Hydra. So Malorum and Hydra stop outside Yoda's chambers, and Ferris feels a slight disturbance in the Force, and he realises that, oh, Obi-Wan was correct, yeah, Malorum is Force sensitive, but he doesn't think and so he hides his connection to the Force, but he doesn't really think that Malorum would be skilled enough to feel his presence anyway. And Malorum starts saying to the assistant, which again I'm just going to call Hydra, and I'll just read out this last bit. "Don't sound the general alarm," Malorum snapped. "By all means look, but look quietly. Lord Vader has decided to pay us an unannounced visit. I don't want him to know about this until the intruders are caught." "Yes, sir." Ferris felt the dark side of the Force surge in a sickening wave. So powerful he inadvertently shrank back. He knew what it meant. The Sith Lord had arrived. And that's where we end the chapter. I personally enjoyed the chapter. It really did start to pick up a lot of speed once we got into the kitchen. It really just was... I was complaining in Dark Warning how each chapter was just ba 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 ba, but this is just... This just took every chapter being ba 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 ba, to every moment in a chapter being ba 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 ba. So it's even faster now. But yeah, it really did pick up speed. It really did, this chapter. You went from being about the average pace of the book to just being ba 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 ba. So yeah, there were quite a few amusing moments, such as Trevor saying, "Not a can of beans," or it's, "What was the point of a warning if only a moment later you get some stormtroopers up in your face?" So yeah, there were quite a few amusing moments in there. I don't quite understand how that memory of Siri really had any relevance, because it seems to be that's Trevor remembering that memory is what allowed him to use the Force to assist himself to kind of contort his body into that small space. But the whole lesson series trying to teach you seems like a completely different lesson. Maybe she suggests, maybe it's, I could be wrong though, you never know. Maybe I'm wrong and just didn't click with me. Because she does start talking about how your body's not just bone and muscle, it's got fluids and air and something else in there. And maybe that's what it had to do. Maybe that's the part of the memory that Ferris focused on, but it was a bit of a confusing memory, and I think maybe if it was a slightly different event, maybe it would have been a bit more sense, but it's honestly such a small nitpick that it doesn't really matter that much. But yeah, I quite enjoy this chapter. I'm looking forward to the next one. I know Ferris winds up getting captured at some point, because I had a little sneaky look at the Underworld article on Wikipedia, and it does say that Malorm interrogates Ferris at one point, so I'm going to be interested to see that. But yeah. Thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello! I've just read chapter 6 of The Last of the Jedi, Underworld. So we pick up where we last left off, but now Vader has very quickly arrived. He made an unannounced visit and he's now here with Malorm, assuming the hallway because Ferris can see them. And Malorm starts speaking with Vader. And you really just get to see how much of a high opinion of himself Malorm has. And Ferris feels a bit terrified, of course, and you can only really see Vader's boots, but eventually Malorm walks in the way and Vader says, "The situation is normal, you say?" And Malorm starts lying, saying that yes, he arrived a day early, he likes to do that, and he likes to keep surprise and keep everyone on their toes, and it's a good way to learn things. And Vader cuts him off and saying, "You're here because I told you to come here. And if he can stop complimenting himself, perhaps he can tell him why those squads patrolling the hallways." Malorm continues to lie, explaining that he likes to have them have readiness. And Vader just goes, "Do you think I'm a fool?" And Malorm just says, "Excuse me, Lord Vader?" And Vader winds up telling him that it's a waste of time, and his anger starts to build. And he says he hates wasting time, and he says he puts up with him because he's useful. And so he gives him a choice to either tell him the truth or continue his lies. And Ferris starts to feel Malorm's calculations. He can almost feel them. And it says the beat went on a little too long. And Malorm eventually admits that 2 intruders were spotted, and he assures Vader that they're trying to find a way that they are being tracked. And he also tries to again compliment them both, saying, "And in a way this proves that my trap works." And Vader goes, "Really?" And Malorm says, "So the rumours we spread worked." And Vader just goes, "In order for a trap to work, it has to catch its prey. Instead, you got 2 intruders on the loose." And it says that you do not have a Jedi in custody. And Malorm has a bit of a false lightness in his voice, and says temporarily he assures him, and Vader just says assurances don't interest him, and Vader sounds bored, as it's described, and he just treats Malorm with contempt. And Ferris has heard that Malorm was Vader's special pet, but now he noticed that that's just made up gossip. And Vader says that he recalls that a Jedi slipped Malorm's grasp on Bellasa. And Malorum says that he has a spy who's infiltrated Ferris's group, so I'm going to be interested to see who that is. I hope it's not Trevor. I really hope it's not Trevor. But he says that they have a spy who's infiltrated. He explains that he has a spy who's infiltrated the group and he's writing a report. Vader just tells him that he has a tedious obsession with trapping Jedi, and it has led him to neglect Vader's orders. He tells him that he gave you a simple task to stop resistance and rebellion on Coruscant, and he's not doing it. And Malorum goes, "Now, just a minute, Lord Vader. Coruscant is hardly an ordinary assignment. If you are not capable of the job, I'll find someone else to do it." "Of course I am capable, Lord Vader." "Then do it, and do it now. You want to rid yourself of intruders? Blow up the temple." And Malorum gets kind of staggers and says, "Blow it up?" And Vader goes, "Why not?" And Malorum goes, "But his private office is here and valuable records could be lost." And Vader tells him that he overemphasises his own importance. Malorum and Ferris can start to hear Malorum's breath. And he starts to say that, "I see what you're doing. You're trying to discredit me in the eyes of the Emperor, and he wants to destroy his work and his files." And then he realises, oh, you weren't serious, and it was a tactic just formed by Vader to see if he was hiding anything from him, anymore from him. And Vader says, "Files that haven't been tracked, that's against him. That's a files that haven't been banked in Imperial security, that's against the Emperor's directive." And Ferris thinks, this is a battle, Ferris thought. Malorum wants Vader's job. He wants to be the Emperor's pet, and Vader knows exactly what he's up to. Now Malorum gets a bit smug in his tone and says he has permission from the Emperor to keep files private that he feels could jeopardise ongoing investigations. And Vader says, "Do I need to remind you of your own inferiority?" And Vader's anger starts to just quash Malorum's assurance, as it says. And Malorum says he has no secrets from Vader, and there are reports that he hasn't seen yet, and files that need additional notes. He has spies everywhere on Coruscant, and as he knows, and reports on their progress and surveillance in the sub-levels. And he doesn't get to finish when Vader says, "That's last, you're telling me something I want to know." And Malorum continues to say not to mention the delicate matters on Polis Master, with the rumours on Polis Master. And that's when that's when it kind of happens. Vader allows his anger to build, and the whole area starts to shake and break. The windows to Malorum's office burst. The walls are starting to crack. Chairs are being thrown around as Vader allows his anger to build, and he tells Malorum to never speak of that place again. And Malorum goes, "Of course, Lord Vader." And as it's happening, Ferris signals for Trevor to go back, and that's when Vader's anger is continuing to build. And the grating and the wall gets blown off, making Ferris and Trevor exposed. So I am curious as to how they're going to get out of this situation. You know, they don't have a rat now and a turnover to get them out. So I'm curious as to how they get out of this situation. I think this is quite an interesting perspective. I think this is quite interesting to see Malorum, because he really just wants favour with the Emperor. You know that, he really does. Vader knows that Malorum's just a fool who's aspiring to be something he can never be. But Malorum really believes he can take Vader's position, and he's trying to get favour with the Emperor. But you also see kind of his simpleton side, how Vader very easily tricks him in through a personal weak spot on Malorum, where he's very uses his self-importance to his advantage, uses Malorum's self-importance to his advantage. And it's... You really are just thinking for Malorum, what are you doing? You know, you're trying to be superior to Vader. You don't have the favour of the Emperor or the power in the Force to be able to try and act higher up to Vader. And even Vader himself says he only keeps him around because he's useful. Yeah, that's the only reason he puts up with him. And Vader is just so annoyed at having to do this every time with Malorum. How Malorum keeps lying to him, and how... Because, again, he wants to give himself more favour, and it's funny in a way, but not ridiculously funny. But it really just is oh, Malorum, what are you doing? So yeah. But anyway, I think that should do it for this review. Again, this was a shorter chapter, not a whole lot to talk about. I'm going to be interested to see who that spy is, because I really hope the spy is not Trevor. I don't think it's Trevor, but I really hope it's not. I have a feeling it may be Raina or Toma, but then to me that may not make the most sense. I have a feeling it would have to be someone from Belasa. I don't think it's going to be Amianton. It could be Will, but again, I don't think it would be. Again, this is a very tough, and I'm going to be interested to see who that spy is. That's going to be a very interesting thread that I hope to see. But yeah, thank you all for watching, and goodbye, and I'll see you in the next review, hopefully. Hello, I've just read Chapter 7 of The Last of the Jedi, Underworld. Now, this was a very fun chapter. It was, but also... You'll see as I explain. So, to summarise, now Trevor and Ferris are trying to sneak back into the glass of the broken glass, but Vader's there just looking at them, and Ferris and Trevor were looking up, and Ferris is absolutely terrified, and he knows he can't fight off a Sith. He doesn't have the capability. He's not strong enough in the Force to do that yet. And Vader finally releases Malorum from his Force choke. And that's when Ferris starts to draw upon the Force, and it hits him in a way as if it was directed from him, and also as if it was emerging from Yoda's quarters, and it felt like a power that he never felt before. He never felt such power, and it was as if Yoda himself was assisting him, and he grabs Trevor and he kind of leaps up, grabs a loose cable from the ceiling and swings through the hallway and out of it, and Trevor and Ferris begin to run. Alarms start to blaze, and Ferris knows that if Vader wanted him captured, he could have done it. He had the chance to. If Vader clearly didn't have intentions of stopping him, whether it was to humiliate Malorum, whether it was to test Malorum, or if it was just because he didn't care. Either way, Ferris was taking that shot of escape. And he knew Malorum would not allow himself to be humiliated in front of his master. He would not allow himself to lose them in front of Vader. And so Ferris and Trevor, they run off into the analysis room, and as Ferris suspected, it's dark and dusty and empty and disused, and they start running through there, and Trevor goes, "So what's the plan then? To escape that Vader guy? Review? Scary? Creepy?" Paraphrasing there. And Ferris goes on to explain that when he was surveilling when he was doing surveillance on the temple at the start of the book, he noticed that the landing platform wasn't too far away. That the new landing platform wasn't too far away from the Youngling playroom, and that the Youngling playroom had its window partially blown open, and so they could use the Force to leap down from there and steal the ship. And Trevor says, "That's all. It's all well and good, Ferris, but you're forgetting I'm not a Jedi." And Ferris tells him, "You're doing well enough. You've been doing well enough. Now hurry up." And so they run off to the Youngling room, and when they get there, Ferris is absolutely gutted. And it really hits him hard, because he just starts thinking, how did I forget, how did I push aside this thought? The Younglings are dead. He assumed that they might have ran, or the Empire might not have gone after them. But they didn't, they're dead. And it just starts thinking, youth, age, sick, the weak, to the Empire and the Sith, they just go after anyone. Let me see if I can find the line. Youth, age, the sick, the weak. They do not enter into the Sith's calculations. They simply go after what they want. Don't think of it. If you think of it now, it might break you. And as he's and he looks at the toys, and he sees that again the room's devastated, like pretty much any room in the temple at the moment. And he sees that a lot of the toys are thrown about and broken. And Trevor's looking out the window behind a column, and is saying that, "Oh, it looks like they're not letting ships leave. They've gone down into full security." And Ferris comes over, and he looks down and sees an officer in a speeder arguing with some guards, and says, "No, it's not a code red, it's code yellow." And so he's guessing that they are going to let him go, the officer. And he also points to a light on the platform. And then that's when Ferris feels a surge of the Force, and he knows Malorum is close. And so he starts looking around the room, trying to quickly think he needs to get the attention of the guards and the officer, which I assume the guards are just stormtroopers. I doubt royal guards are there. And that's when he picks up a toy that used to be used by the Younglings. They used to use Force to make it float, and it would blink lights. And as they got more skilled in the Force, they could make it roll and dive, and the more the lights would blink. And so he throws the toy down and uses the Force to guide it. Then he perches upon the window, says to Trevor to hold on to him like a monkey lizard, and so Trevor wraps his arms and legs around his back, around him, and as he grabs onto behind him, Ferris leaps down using the Force, and and also when he does get that warning that Malorum is close, he realises that in the temple his force powers are amplified. He's able to much more clearly use the force, unlike where he's usually kind of blindly searching on how to use it. So it may be his powers are amplified, but it also says that he's a bit more, it may be a bit more of a comfortable place for him to use, that it just makes it easier for him to use the force. So it could be one or the other. Anyway, that's when they leap down. The guards start opening fire, or raising their blasters, and I think even opening fire, are they? No, they're not opening fire yet, but they're raising their blaster rifles as they see the toy, and they're a bit unsure as to what it is, if it's a weapon or not. And that's when Ferris and Trevor land, and Trevor very quickly gets off Ferris's back and slides into the seat, and Ferris grabs the officer under the arms and says, "I need a ride!" and throws him over the side, and Ferris gets into the seat. The officer, he lands unhurt, but it was a bit of a rough landing, and he takes out his blaster and starts to open fire, and Ferris and Trevor says, "Time to go," and Ferris and Trevor speeds off in the speeder as the guards are starting to open fire. And yeah, that's really it for this chapter. The last bit was quite fun, and I think most of the chapter, it really has a lot going. Really has a lot of varied emotions, this chapter. The last bit was quite fun. The bit with the younglings was heartbreaking. The bit with Vader was very intense. Between getting to the playroom and then in the analysis room specifically, I mean, that's quite a fun scene. That's quite a funny scene. And I like how Vader doesn't really actually go after them, because he has the chance to. Because Ferris is just I want to say standing there, but he's not. He's on his knees. Because he's crawling, but he's got Ferris just there for a moment as Vader looks at him, and he looks back, wondering who Vader is. He wonders who Vader is. Is he half man, half machine? Which, of course, we know who he is, but Ferris doesn't know. And you really just see how he's terrified of him. How he freezes for a moment. And then he very quickly has a reaction. But again, I find it interesting that Vader doesn't really go after them. And I do find the concept of him wanting to humiliate Malorum by letting them get away to be quite an interesting concept, and I think it is a bit funny as well. Especially for the character that Malorum is, he thinks he's very smug, he thinks he's much better and more respected and everything than he actually is. And I think that's quite a interesting perspective. And I think it's funny if Vader was intentionally letting them get away. Because again, it does say, was he letting them get away? Was he to humiliate Malorum? Was he testing Malorum? Did he just not care? So we don't actually know, but it is still a very good moment and scene in the book. But yeah. Anyway, I think that will do it for this review. Again, not a whole lot to talk about, but yeah. So thank you all for watching, and goodbye.